Welcome to the Joy Lab podcast, where we help you uncover and foster your most joyful self. Your hosts, Dr. Henry Emmons and Dr. Amy Prasek, bring you the ideal mix of soulful and scientifically sound tools to spark your joy, even when it feels dark. When you're ready to experiment with more joy, combine this podcast with the full Joy Lab program over at joylab.coach.
Hello, I'm Henry Emmons, and welcome to Joy Lab.
And I'm Amy Prasek. So we are in our month of equanimity, or balance is another word we've been using this month. And today we're talking about something that can keep us stuck in maybe an unbalanced state that might be hard to realize. And so I'm going to explain it with a question for us to all kind of think through. So when it comes to feeling in a rut or in a bad mood, or when you're feeling stressed, do you focus more on making the negative emotions go away to feel better? Or do you focus on letting more positive emotions or nourishing experiences in to feel better? Answers. You can yell them out. Henry, do you want to answer?
Yes, I admit it. I focus more on the trying to get rid of the negative emotions.
Absolutely. Why did we create Joy Lab? So Henry and I could focus more on the positive with all of you. So if you also said focus more on negative emotions, wishing for those to leave to get some relief, then you are in the majority of folks. Also the majority when it comes to mental health and how that's approached and treated and researched, right? The focus is nearly always on getting rid of negative emotions like sadness or anxiety rather than focusing on what we can let in to feel better. And there's some good reasons for that in healthcare, but we'll get into that right now. But I think what it does come down to is the realization that this is often not helpful. It's kind of just what catches our attention first, this negative experience, and what we've kind of always done, the status quo. But usual treatment for something like depression isn't super successful. It's about a 50% success rate with the usual meds and limited therapy. And then 2 years later, half of those folks who had success will have their depression return, most likely. So I said it can be helpful in some ways how we approach it in healthcare. I mean, we need to deal with what's feeling bad, but we're certainly missing something here when it comes to depression, which 20% of us will likely experience in our lifetime. So this matters. I think we're also missing that far more common state, sort of right under diagnosable depression that many of us languish in, where we maybe don't feel bad enough, but we sure don't feel great or even good. And we're going to talk about that state of minor depression in a later episode. So I'm kind of setting us up here. In our last element, we talked about savoring. So seeing and soaking in the good stuff. What we're talking about today, though, is more about understanding if we're striking a balance of navigating the negative and letting in the good when we're not feeling well. And if we're not letting in the good, if we're not doing enough of that, how can we do it to help us get out of cycles of depression, anxiety, and chronic stress?
So when this topic came before us and I started to think about it, I came across a study here that I thought was relevant. So I am going to go out on a limb. As you know, Amy, I am not nearly the research geek you are.
You're great.
But I'm going to try to channel you for a minute, and I'm going to try to get into this research, which is, to me, a little bit complex, but I think it sheds some interesting light on what we're talking about here.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the study is about depression and learning styles. So first, there are two hallmarks of depression. This is coming from me, not the study. Okay. The two hallmarks of depression, I think, one is a low mood, which might be sad or down, or for some people, it's just flat. And we usually call that dysphoria. The other hallmark of depression is the inability to get pleasure from things that would normally give you pleasure. And that's called anhedonia. So all of the other symptoms of depression that we're so familiar with, things like changes in energy and sleep and appetite, really, they're all kind of secondary. And those first two are the real core symptoms. So anhedonia, the loss of pleasure, involves the dopamine system. And that's what the researchers were looking at in this study. Specifically, they were looking at two key brain signals, which they called prediction error and expected value. And they wanted to see if they could predict how likely someone is to recover from depression based on these two things. Okay? So prediction error means that what you thought was going to happen is not what actually happened. You made a mistake in your prediction. And guess what? People who predict that the outcome will be worse than it actually is, in other words, those who are focused on the negative, are less likely to recover from depression. So it gave them a good ability to predict who was going to recover. The other factor, expected value, is how the brain calculates the possible rewards from something you're going to do, like let's say exercising or hanging out with a friend, or maybe even savoring a good meal like we talked about last month. So in other words, it's whether or not we expect to get good things from something that we are doing for our own good. Okay? We're going to do something that we think is going to be good for us. Do we expect it'll pay us back or not? So it turns out that when these are measured, the researchers can predict who is more likely to recover from depression. Interesting to me, the best predictor is whether or not we expect to get value from the things that we do for value.
Wow.
That's a stronger predictor even than the prediction error.
I thought it'd be the other way.
So did I. So as I understand it then, the purpose of this research is to get better at personalizing treatment approaches.
Yes.
And here's how the researchers framed that. By observing how each person responds to rewards and setbacks, we can open new pathways for designing treatments that match individual learning patterns. That's what they said. I read something deeper into this. Maybe it's not there, but this is what I'm seeing. And that is this: before we get depressed, we might be able to reduce our risk or improve our chances of recovering if we can change the way our brains work. And especially if we learn to create an expectation that when we do something positive or fun or pleasurable, it's going to be good.
That is a great study. I love it.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. The power of prediction and our expectations. So, kind of joking at the beginning, but it's true. This is work we do at Joy Lab, and Henry is one of my mentors. But the work we do here is I'm also constantly reminding myself, joy. We're looking at cultivating more of the good stuff rather than focusing on rooting out all the bad stuff. And so we do that work here at Joy Lab. We work to change our brain and to give more attention to bringing in the good because we really need it. And clearly, it really matters. I slammed healthcare at the beginning, but there are new treatments integrating this. Things like augmented depression therapy, positive CBT, acceptance and commitment therapy does some of this. So there are other avenues that are opening up that are seeing the data. That's pretty clear that we're missing sort of this big half of how we approach depression, or at least we're not looking at it holistically. Kind of maybe pivoting here, I think what is surprising is that many of us have this assumption that letting the good stuff in is always easy. Like it'll just happen if it's there, that us humans will see it, we'll take it in as if it's just this automatic response because it's so clearly good for us. And that's just not the case.
Because why wouldn't we?
Right. So let's get into a little bit of that. But I want another belief that I think we need to kind of bust is that if you aren't an optimist or a relentlessly positive person, then, well, that's the end of it for you. You can't change what you see or how you feel or what you think. And that's not true either. Again, why Joy Lab exists. And I know I've been there. So here are some reasons why letting in the positive may not be so easy. Let's get into that. And we're going to talk about avoidance first. Why would we not let in the good stuff? Why would we avoid it? There are some formal terms for this, and I actually think they're kind of helpful. They are avoidance of positivity, AOP, and fear of positivity, FOP. So avoidance of positivity describes when we actively avoid positive experiences. And we often do this because we believe happiness won't last or that we don't deserve it. And then fear of positivity is when we feel uncomfortable or have anxiety around feeling happy, which sounds kind of odd, but this is also a common experience. This can sometimes be related to a past negative experience that followed happiness. So if you resonate here, you're probably that person who is waiting for the next shoe to drop. Like you don't want to get your hopes up because you know it'll come crashing down, that kind of experience, that fear. And there's also a psychological effect really related that I think is helpful to call out. And it's something called the contrast effect. This is when we feel or sense something positive or happy, and then we contrast it immediately with thoughts around it ending or its fragility. So we'll see something good, we'll feel some happiness, and then immediately the contrast. This isn't going to last. I shouldn't get my hopes up. It's all going to come collapsing down. And it can really fuel that fear and avoidance of positivity. The thing about contrasting here also is that the more dramatic, of course, negative contrast is kind of what burrows in our system. So we're contrasting. It's not the happiness that we start to put more weight on. We see the negative. So we may want to protect ourselves from that contrast that we've thought up by not letting the good thing happen to us in the first place. Like a little survival strategy, but completely unhelpful. So if something good spontaneously happens to us, we might even push it away, try to dampen it. So you can see that fear or avoidance. But oftentimes as we're contrasting, we're just setting ourselves up for, I'm going to block this defense of the positive. So as we continue to do this, as we practice this, we do it enough times, we get really good at it, and it shuts out a lot of positive.
Yeah. So, when I hear what you just said, Amy, it's just natural to think that just makes no sense. Why would we want to keep ourselves from being happy? So it helps me to remember that when it comes to the psyche and when it comes to our emotional life, very often things don't make sense. It's not rational. This part of our being is not rational. We are driven by these strange forces outside of our conscious control, and the rational mind it tries, but it doesn't have control over all this. Mm-hmm. So, did you notice what I just said? Outside of our conscious control. That is exactly the point. In that moment, we're not conscious enough. And we are then letting fear run things far more than we really want it to do for our own good. So in Joy Lab, we're trying not to offer fixes to these inner problems. We are intentionally focusing on the good, which is a very different approach to it. It's not because we don't think problems exist. We're not being Pollyannish, thinking that everything is good and that's all that there is. Although you could make a case for that. But rooting out each problem one by one is just way too hard. It takes way too much effort. And I just think it's so much more efficient to raise our entire level of awareness, which is precisely how to deal with this fear of positivity. Mm. So when Amy said that we tell ourselves that happiness won't last or that we push away the good stuff. I think she's right. I think you're right, Amy. This is what happens, but it is only a small, fearful part of ourselves that's doing that. And there is a much bigger, much more courageous part of ourselves that is able to see what we are doing. This is what's really important. This is consciousness, that there's part of us that can see when we are doing this, and that also knows this is not true, and that can hold our inner balance through all of this. We contain multitudes, as the poet said, and one of our inner selves is able to observe and watch this without being all caught up in it. It takes some practice to be able to do this, to stay with this larger, healthier part of ourselves. But when we do, it's kind of magic, because then we find out we don't have to fix this part of ourselves that's scared, because it just fades into the background as soon as we stop feeding it. It was never real in the first place.
Yeah, we can stop feeding it. I think the invitation to not root out every perceived problem is just completely liberating. Not just an invitation, like it's just not effective. We're going beyond just an encouragement, an invitation to soak in the good. This is the reality of how we can care for our inner life, how we can move in the world, that we have to have that balance. It gives us space to make forward progress, to look up and make some changes rather than looking down constantly, just mired in what we feel like isn't working. So we can feed something else. We do that here at Joy Lab in the podcast and program. This whole episode is like, here's why we do Joy Lab. I don't mean to say it constantly, but like, this is it. We feed the feel-good stuff here. We practice also getting through the negative emotions, not suppressing them. We practice this in balance. I think that's so important. So check in. See if you're letting in enough good. And if not, you can rebalance the scales. That's the message. That's what we do here. Stay with us, and we can do that nourishing work together. So to close our time today, I want to share some wisdom from Mary Oliver. This is from her poem, Don't Hesitate. I'm going to take kind of the beginning and the end. I would encourage you, though, to go to your library or buy a Mary Oliver book to get all the good middles and all the good beginning and endings of all of her poems. So here it is. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. Whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
Thank you for listening to the Joy Lab podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, visit joylab.coach to learn more about the full Joy Lab program. Be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Please remember that this content is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical advice and is not a replacement for advice and treatment from a medical professional. Please consult your doctor or other qualified health professional before beginning any diet change, supplement, or lifestyle program. Please see our terms for more information.